Hi, everybody. Welcome back to day 5 of Beat the Heat, our anti-inflammation boot camp this week, where we have been talking about the 5 places of home and health where chronic inflammation tends to lurk and what to do about it. Last night, we talked about household cleaners and how the idea of needing to live a life of disinfecting everything and of sanitization doesn't serve us well. It's only half of the story to zero in on the germ theory versus terrain theory, which I talked about last night, and how to go about looking for those chemical compounds of common household cleaning products and the consequences of working with them, and of course what to use instead. I gave you a recipe for an all-purpose cleaner in the house and tips on other areas to inspect to really create that environment or that terrain for you to thrive as an organism. And tonight we're going to be talking about the liver. And if you don't know me already, I'm Chris Quinones. I'm a licensed massage therapist, Ayurvedic health counselor, and yoga specialist. And I have been working and living with Ayurveda for the last 15 years and used it in my personal life as a competitive athlete, as a woman who has some hormonal imbalances, and a lot of just generally I'm healthy, thank you, God willing. But I came to Ayurveda through an injury, through a competitive sport injury and my then yoga practice. And so these systems really joined forces in my 20s. And I was able to really adjust my lifestyle, practicing the habits of the yogis and this system of self-healing of Ayurveda. And so today I want to wrap up our time together by talking about one of the most important detoxification organs in the body, which is the liver. And the liver has quite a few functions in the body. And we all, I think, know by now that the liver is a detox organ, right? That it filters the blood, it helps keep the blood clean, and it also helps in the production of new blood cells, red blood cells. It regulates blood volume. It helps emulsify and break down fats in digestion. It helps regulate metabolism. It helps with bowel movements and making sure there's peristaltic action and movement within the bowels. It is really responsible for converting the elements that live within our food to the elements that will nourish our tissues in the body. So how do we get here, right? So let me first back up and say that in America, we dump about 4 billion pounds of toxic waste into our environment every year, right? So it's in the soil, the water, the air that we're breathing, hence why I spent some time yesterday talking about things you can do to mitigate those effects. And so the liver in the body is what's going to be filtering out all this crap, right? And how did we get to a point where we're now seeing fatty liver disease in individuals, and that gallbladder removal is now the #1 elective surgery in the United States? How did we get here? And part of the issue, or I should say, #1 public enemy with regard to liver inflammation is our processed foods. Processed, unrefined foods that have likely been treated with pesticides, which is public enemy #2, or been genetically modified. Um, when we, gosh, I'm going to date myself here, but a couple decades ago, when we all got scared of cholesterol, right? Cholesterol was bad for the heart. And so the food industry pulled cholesterol out of their products. And so what happened there is that something else had to go in. And what was used a lot of the times were these really unrefined polyunsaturated fats that are unstable. And to make them stable, they needed to be boiled, heated, bleached, even deodorized. And that's what makes them toxic. So pulling out cholesterol from the American diet, replacing it with these highly processed foods that are not organic and do not have any of that life force energy, that prana, is the number one problem that we just simply haven't been able to recover from the damage of these kinds of ingredients going into our food sourcing. So these oils, these polyunsaturated fats being unstable, were processed in a way to make them stable and then put into our foods. So that loaf of bread that doesn't get stale after a day of leaving it on the counter likely has these highly processed and refined oils in them. And the problem is that they destroy the microbiome in the gut, as do pesticides. And, you know, I'm going to read from, this is Dr. Lod's book. Dr. Vasant Lod is Ayurvedic guru, health expert in all around the world, actually. And this is his general fundamental principles of Ayurveda textbook. And he talks about the liver being both an excretory and secretory organ. It secretes bile and excretes unwanted toxic materials, including heavy metals and bacteria. Bile is a type of pitta dosha. We actually call it the Ranjaka pitta, the pitta that is responsible for the coloration of our skin. That's why people who have trouble with the liver and bile flow will often have a yellow hue or tinge to their skin or the sclera of their eyes. In fact, when I was a baby, my mom told me that I was born jaundice. So actually, I wasn't born jaundice. It somehow happened after my delivery, where some of my blood got mixed with some of her blood, they believe. And as a result, I became very jaundice and was put into under the lights for a couple of days before they would let her take me home. And since then, as an adult and getting into holistic healing and these wisdom traditions, I've often had other practitioners from other modalities like traditional Chinese medicine, without my prompting or sharing my health history with them in that regard, will identify that my liver meridian is very weak. So I'm going to talk about what to do about that to support the liver in just a moment. But I want to continue on with reading about the functions of the liver here, right? So bile has its own function. It helps move the bowels and allow for complete elimination. It breaks down fat. It converts glucose into glycogen and stores it as energy in the muscle tissues. It is pretty darn important, and without it, we wouldn't be able to digest fats. We would constantly be regurgitating it. Bile is yellowish and green in color. It's liquid, oily, bitter, and pungent, and it's also alkaline. Bile helps neutralize stomach acid. Otherwise, the acid would just burn a hole right through the organ. And so if bile is not flowing as a result of eating a diet in highly processed foods or being exposed to pesticides, then we've got a problem. And so that bile is not flowing and creates difficulty in our digestion. And oftentimes you'll see, if you look at the color of your stool in the toilet before flushing, if it's green or yellowish, then that indicates that you may in fact have a bile backup in your liver and or gallbladder. So I'm going to talk about what foods to eat to correct that in a moment. So I already talked about bile helping with excreting, with excretion, excuse me. Bile salts reduce surface tension and act as a buffer. So they emulsify the fat and control cholesterol levels. It's an acid-alkali balance in the body. And the digestive fire that I talked about in I believe it was the second session of the gut, is what we call Jathar Agni. It's the main Agni in digestive fire of the body. But in Ayurvedic medicine, it's also only one of 13. So there are 5 of those other 12 Agnis that reside specifically in the liver. And they take up residence in the form of enzymes, if we were to compare it or correlate it to Western medicine. And so these enzymes, there is a Bhuta Agni, or an elemental Agni, that resides in the liver for each of the elements of space, air, fire, water, and earth. And these Bhuta Agnis, these liver fires, if you will, these liver enzymes, are what allow for the breakdown of the elements from our food into the gross body. Public enemy number 3 is stress. Stress and unexpressed or repressed emotions like anger, hate, jealousy. These are emotions that in yoga and Ayurveda are very heating in nature, and they're very sharp in nature, and they break things down, which is the nature of the fire element itself. And the liver is considered a fire organ in Ayurvedic medicine. And so each of these fires are responsible for another level of digestion to break down rasa, that initial fluid and first tissue in the body that we create from our partially digested food, is then nourishing the subsequent tissue of blood, which then nourishes the next tissue, and so on through the 7 tissues of the body. And this is why the liver is just so darn important, both in Ayurvedic medicine and in Western medicine. It really does a lot and can function with 3/4 of it being disabled. So it's a highly sophisticated organ, and there are definitely ways that we can support it. So with regard to diet, the best thing to do to help with any backup of bile, or what we now know in Western medicine, the science actually has a term for it called bile sludge, where we aren't able, because of a weak or impaired digestive capacity, able to break down the fats in our diet, and we're just not able to convert those nutrients. And so what happens is the bile it gets very thick and viscous in the body. And if it's not flowing out of the ducts into the small intestine, along with pancreatic enzymes that allow for digestion and immune system building, then we have this backup of bile into the liver that the ducts actually can't drain it. And as a result, all that fat gets deposited into the liver instead of being digested and broken down. And that's how and why we now have so many incidences of fatty liver disease here in the United States, even if you maybe don't even eat meat, right? That the components of having a non-organic, non-whole food diet are components that lead to dis-ease and lead to chronic inflammation. And, in order to mitigate those effects and really support our livers in the long haul, we definitely want to go back to eating seasonally. right? That we're going to be eating from the harvest of the time of year that Mother Nature has provided us with these microorganisms in the shoots and roots and leaves that are equipped to inoculate our bodies against the bugs of that season. And that's why eating seasonally is so darn important. And we have 3 harvest seasons. Typically, we think we have 4 seasons here in New England, but from a perspective of food and nourishment, there's really only 3. We've got the spring harvest with the microorganisms in foods that were designed to break congestion and lymph and stagnation. These are your bitter tastes and your bitter herbs. So all your dark leafy green vegetables, roots like turmeric and burdock root are very popular. Dandelion is another. Milk thistle is another. Golden seal is another. These are all bitter tasting foods, and bitter tasting foods are what are produced naturally in the spring harvest. And I want to talk about what the bitter taste does. The bitter taste, I'm reading again from Dr. Laud's General Principles book. The bitter taste is called tikta in Sanskrit. It has both air and ether elements. It's both cool, light, and dry in nature. The bitter taste increases vata, but decreases pitta, and kapha. Again, the liver is a fire organ. It's a pitta organ. So the bitter taste is very balancing to it. And the bitter taste is also the most lacking taste in North American diet. We have a whole lot of sweet, sour, and salty that we've become basically addicted to, and we don't have enough bitter taste in our diets. And this is where we have this backup of bile and difficulty processing fats, processing glutens, seeds, nuts, certain grains like wheat. And we've gotten into this spiral vortex of gluten-free diets, which, gluten is more challenging and difficult for the body to digest, but it's not poison. And with healthy liver function and a digestive fire, you should be able to process gluten, with the exception of true celiac disease and the like. But living a gluten-free diet, if you don't really need to, is not in accordance with living with nature and natural healing in Ayurvedic theory. So bitter taste is also an anti-inflammatory. It helps control fevers. It's an antispasmodic, laxative, and also allows for some firmness in the skin and muscle tissue. It's very, very good to use for people with high blood sugar levels, the bitter taste that is, because it helps regulate our digestion. And so the bitter foods I mentioned before are the ones you want to favor. And in the springtime, Mother Nature provides them in abundance. This other second harvest of the year is summer. And summer is where all the microorganisms growing in the foods are designed to help dissipate heat in the body. So these are your lymph movers, your bile movers. These are going to be things like, again, your dark leafy greens, any of the bitter taste, foods like cherries and pomegranate and watermelon and aloe vera. These are all naturally heat dissipating substances that the Mother Nature in the world just provides us every summer. And then the fall harvest provides us with foods that are going to help build and boost immunity. A lot of our root vegetables and our more dense earth element laden foods that are going to give us the stability and the groundedness for what here in New England is a very cold and dark and dry season. So eating in tune with the seasons, these 3 harvest seasons, and favoring the bitter taste in your diet is going to be huge, huge in getting the liver and the gallbladder to be able to flow that bile easily. Another one is self-massage, and you've heard me talk about that earlier this week with regard to lymphatic support, and that it is a practice the yogis do every day of oiling their body to support the microbiome of the skin and control energy and allow the mind to stay steady and grounded. And the oil itself is used as medicine or as the vehicle to deliver medicine based on what formula and herbs were put into that particular substance or oil. And massaging the abdomen is pretty key. Now, there are massage balls out there. I'm a big fan of Yoga Tune-Up, the Jill Miller roll method. She's an excellent body worker who has really, created this system of self-massage using these balls. And one of the balls in her set is called the Courageous ball. And it's an inflatable ball about the size of a soccer ball, maybe. And you can determine how much you want to fill it with air. And then using that, you can use it to massage the abdomen, laying on the floor and literally sandwiching the ball between your body and the floor, or standing and leaning against a wall, pressing the ball into the abdomen and right along the rib cage where the diaphragm attachments are. I find as a body worker, in addition to a lot of that bile backup that happens in the ducts, there is adhesions that actually form within the viscera of the body where the liver and the gallbladder can literally get stuck to the diaphragm and create tenderness and pain here. So if you were to palpate on yourself in this upper left quadrant of your rib cage and feel for a particularly tender spot, or if you experience some sharp tenderness as you palpate that area, it could be an indication that you might have a backup of some bile going on. So increasing the fiber in your diet, using celery, the bitter taste, more of those dark leafy greens will certainly get the bile moving along. Neem is a very well-known Ayurvedic herb for doing that, as is mangista, which is a root. Any food that has a red stain to it, like cherries and pomegranates, these are blood scrubbers, as I like to call them. Beets are another one. I love beets. I eat a lot of them. And it's a good thing too, because my liver really needs it. Given that I was born with this vulnerability all my life, my liver has just needed a little bit more support. Now, I don't experience that on a daily basis. I actually have a strong Agni because of my lifestyle and my habits of practicing these systems. I'm now like 20 plus years down the road into this. And it wasn't always this way, but, now I feel great. And if I hadn't come across this knowledge earlier and adapted my lifestyle in the ways that I have, I probably would be having a lot more difficulty with my digestion and my ability to maintain really vitality and have a strong, healthy body and mind. Alcohol is another common cause of liver inflammation. So depending on your usage and your unique history, you want to minimize alcohol. Now, in the Vedas, there were classical and still are classical Ayurvedic formulas that use medicinal wines. But you have to remember that these are not as potent or as strong as the wines that we drink now in our modern day and time. Plus, serving size is something we in America tend to have difficulty with. And so a true pour glass of wine is only, I don't even know, I'm not a server, but a certain amount of ounces, I imagine, right? Maybe 4 ounces would be a pour, I imagine. And if we're having more than that, then obviously it's just more heat, more sugar in the body that, again, just stokes the fire of inflammation in the mind body. Emotions I talked about earlier, and I like to use pranayama as one of my go-to techniques in my yoga and Ayurveda practice. Using pranayama techniques, yogic breathing exercises, is a very generalized or oversimplified explanation of pranayama, is exceptionally good at cooling the mind body and helping to manage those waves of emotions like anger and jealousy and hate uh, from imprinting on the mind body, from imprinting on chitta and having the mind project all this heat and intensity, right? Which was guilty as charged, was me before I found Ayurveda in my 20s. My competitive nature and my personality, just as a Latina and coming from a really loud family that was boisterous, and I had to really be loud just to even be seen, wasn't always the best later in my adult years as I learned. But, being able to manage my emotions was really key, and pranayama was a big part of that. And so one technique I'm going to share with you right now, and this is called Shitali or Sitkari pranayama. And this is a cooling breath that's done with the mouth open on the inhales and the mouth closed on the exhales. As you inhale, the air rushes over the tongue. And then as you exhale, you close the mouth and press the tip of the tongue gently on the roof of the soft palate, directing that cool energy up to the brain. Now, if you aren't able to curl your tongue into the shape that the yogis use for this technique, right? Not everyone can do that. You can breathe through the teeth, and that's what Sitkari is. Breathing through the teeth, lips parted. And these are rhythmic breaths, just like your deep belly breath before. The breaths are equal in inhalation to exhalation and should be relaxed and soft, nothing forced, right? This is a heat dissipating practice. Now, if you're someone working with cold conditions or poor circulation, this definitely would not be the practice for you, as we don't want to continue to cool the body. This is something especially for those heated moments where the mind, where the tongue gets a little too hot, a little too sharp. And, there's been a lot of that going on right now. So everyone could use this technique. So go ahead and just sit up nice and tall, get comfortable, and establish a nice inhale and exhale with the mouth closed, and just establishing your breath for a moment. Letting all the information from tonight and the week wash over you. And on your next inhale, sip air through teeth or tongue. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Tongue to the tip of the mouth. Inhale. Exhale. Back and forth. at your own pace. Sipping in through teeth or tongue, passing it through the palate to the brain and mind. You can pause if you need to swallow or moisten your palate again, and then continue. Feeling for that cool air just swirling at the back of the throat and over the tongue. Nourishing and building the tissues with the lunar, cooling, feminine energy of Shakti. Softening intensity and sharpness. Falling into surrender. And return back to your normal breath. And just observe for a moment how you feel after that 2-minute practice round of Shitali or Sitkari pranayam, cooling yogic breath to cool the mind, cool inflammation, support the liver, steady the mind. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. So with that, you've learned a lot this week. On day 1, we talked about why a thin body isn't necessarily a healthy body and how to support healthy muscles and joints. On day 2, we talked about poor food combining and how to avoid them, which combinations to avoid to support the gut and inflammation there. On day 3, we talked about why getting to bed at an early time is necessary for brain health and to reduce the risk of neurodegenerative diseases. Last night, I talked about home health inspection with our household cleaners and products and appliances in our homes. And today we talked about the liver. So those are the 5 areas, guys, that I hope get you started on investigating and exploring and observing and tweaking your daily habits and practices to support the mind body in its divine knowledge and wisdom. Your body and mind know how to heal themselves. We just need to give it what it's required, which is true rest, deep nourishment, and proper movement and exercise to keep that lymph, to keep that bile, to keep that prana moving. So the reality is it's something you all can do, but it's not easy either. It's not easy to redesign one's lifestyle. And that's why community is really important and why I try to create that community here at Rasayana, online in these webinars or Zoom calls with my clients, or in the office where I'm working one-on-one with an individual, giving detoxifying and bodywork treatments to support their lifestyle. So if you're interested in learning more about how to apply an Ayurvedic lifestyle for you personally and any issues that you might want to address, reach out to me and let me know. You can go to my website at www.rasa-yana.com. And on my homepage, there's a contact form that emails me directly. And reach out. I would love to set up a conversation with you to talk about your goals, to understand where you're at right now, and maybe give you a few tips on what your next steps can be. So I hope to hear from you. Until then, namaste.